part of this Hudson.
This is recorded, right?
So this class, too,
Hit that.
this class is for the absolute novice. Okay. This is for somebody that knows that canning is food in a jar, but not much more than that, okay? We're not gonna go into recipes or anything. This is really a basic class, okay? Ooh. But even if you're a canner and you're an experienced canner, you're gonna go home with prizes, most likely. And you might learn something, who knows? So, let me introduce you to the prizes first. And I'm gonna come around here for that. So, we have very small, I am gonna be very loud, very small prizes all the way up to very large prizes. And again, this is basic food preservation. It's not just canning, okay? We're gonna touch a little bit on dehydrating towards the end and drying. We're also gonna very lightly touch on freezing, you know, just general food preparation and storage. We'll probably mainly focus on water bath canning, but I also will go over the basics of pressure canning as well, okay? So we're gonna start off, we have, this is really loud. This is really loud. But anyway, we're gonna start off, we have just labels. We have a bottle opener. We have quilted covers to make your jelly jars really cute and the jute with the beads on it. We have sets of rings and lids, both wide mouth and small mouth or regular mouth. We also have more lids. We have cool little wooden lids. We have canning kits. We have a mainly plastic one. It's got stainless steel in it too, but this is a stainless steel kit. We have the Ball Home Preservation, Complete Home Preservation book. We have 5 copies of that. We have a Back to Basics Ball book. We have a Water Bath and Pressure Canning Master's Cookbook. And we have the USDA Home Canning book as well. We have 5 copies of this, okay? We also have oxygen absorbers for your dry goods or your dehydrated foods. And we have a couple of dehydrator cookbooks back here. We also have, these are for freezing, and I'll demonstrate those after. This also is something that you can put outside. If you're a gardener or you want to dry herbs or whatever, you can put herbs in here and put them outside and hang them. I actually have one of these at home. And our grand prizes, which if I was taking this class, I'd be super excited. And I'm going to demonstrate this after. This actually takes the air out of a mason jar, and it will keep a seal. You know, it's got quite a seal. You'll see that as well. We have a food sealer, one that you put, you know, things in and it seals the bag and sucks all the air out of it. You can put whatever kind of foods in here, and it actually has a gentle cycle too. This is digital, and I believe it's stainless steel if I remember right. But it's digital, and it will also do like a loaf of bread. It'll go easy, it won't suck the bread down into a little ball, you know? We got a water bath canner, and we have the tools to go with it. So anything you needed to start water bath canning is in this box right here, okay? We have and this was gonna be the grand prize, but this isn't the grand prize, a 23-quart Presto pressure cooker. But we have an Excalibur, which is top of the line dehydrator. It's actually this guy, but the brand new version. Mine is probably 12 years old, and it's been pretty used. So this is brand new. It's a beautiful unit. That's almost $200 right there. Plus, we got the silicone sheets that are buried under here that go with it to do like fruit rolls and stuff like that, like fruit leather. So those are our prizes, and Sherry's going to give them out periodically. We're going to do the smaller prizes during the presentation. When we do the intermission, we're going to give away the books. And then at the end, so everybody gets a chance to win these 5 bigger prizes, everybody's name is going to go back in again. So if you've won a smaller prize, don't think you're going to be out of the running for those big ones, okay? All right, so again, my name is Amanda. Another thing we're gonna do is we're going to save questions until this class is completely over. If you wanna ask questions, come up and ask me individually afterwards, because sometimes people have to go places. And you know, they only have a certain amount of time to be a place. I know we did a gardening class a little bit further back, and some people had to leave because it went a little long. We asked questions during, but we can ask questions after. So let's see. This will be recorded, and Sherry's gonna be handing out a sheet that is sources that you can trust for canning methods and recipes, and it will say where this course is online, okay? So here we go. Let's go. So this is a basic food preservation course, as I said. It's a beginner's class, and we'll be covering the very basics of why preserve food at home. A brief history of food preservation, and when I was setting up this course, I found this pretty interesting. Might not be interesting to everybody, but it's nice to know how this started. The main methods of canning. Why do we care about our altitude and food acidity? Examples of high and low acid foods that are safe to can. Foods that are not safe to can. Basic tools, supplies, and equipment. We're going to have an intermission in the middle, and that's when we'll raffle the books off. And I'm going to do a bit of a mock demonstration on how to water bath can. We're going to maybe pretend to make jelly, okay, or jam. We're going to go over the jar sizes and styles and what they're used for. And again, we're going to do sources that you can trust for the safe canning methods and recipes. And we'll have the bonus on dehydrating foods, the methods of dehydration, foods that can't be dehydrated, and a general conversation on like drying and storing foods. And then we'll have the grand prize raffle. Excuse me. So let's start off. Why preserve food at home? If you have a garden, it's a great way to store your food. Everybody knows that when you have a garden, it has a tendency to everything to come in all at once. What are you going to do with that stuff? You want to save it. You can only give so much zucchini to the neighbors, right? You know, before they're throwing them back in your car window at you as you're trying to drive away. So even if you don't have a garden, you can go to your local supermarket, buy in bulk. I have not yet done this. Chris tried to encourage me to do this, but I haven't yet done this, but I think I probably will. You can go to orchards and farmers markets, or maybe you're even involved in a food co-op. There's the health issue. We know now people are seeing that our food chain is pretty messed up, you know, and you can't pick up a box of food without seeing so many names that you can't identify in the ingredients or pronounce even, right? You can control sugar and salt and all that stuff when you're preserving at home. You can save money. You can buy in bulk at your supermarket or wherever, or if you are getting the stuff out of your garden, and it's a wonderful way to save money. And then there's the satisfaction. There's nothing like being able to go into your basement or your food pantry and pull out a jar of carrots that you did yourself, you know, even if they are from the store. You know, a can of dilly beans, where are you going to buy dilly beans, right? And you know you've prepared it, right, with your own hands. Being able to share food with other people is also an exciting thing. Our neighbor just took down some trees and some brush in our backyard, and I was able to go into the garden and pull a bunch of stuff out and give him jelly to go with it. You know, it was nice. It's nice, and that's a lost thing now. You don't see a ton of that. We could use more of that. And that's just a few reasons why you might want to preserve food at home. So I'm going to go over a brief history of food preservation. So the early ancient cultures used sun and wind to dehydrate foods, and salt curing and fermentation, primitive forms of fermentation. So, I mean, food preservation's been around for a long time. 1795, and I thought this was interesting, Napoleon offered 12,000 francs as a reward for a new method of food preservation to support large quantities of French troops. And Nicholas Appert was the guy that answered and got his reward. He invented airtight food preservation, and he was known as the father of food science. And then came 1810 with Peter Durand. He created the first tin canister. We could probably do without that, but in 1812, the first American cannery was opened in New York City. 1858, John L. Mason patents the mason jar. And in 1884, the Ball Corporation starts manufacturing glass jars for home canning. 1903 came the Alexander Kerr Glass Corporation, which I know you've probably heard of Ball. There's also Kerr. Maybe you've heard of them as well. It's another really good, trusted name. And in 1915, they were granted a patent for a two-piece disposable metal canning lid, which I'm sure changed everything. In 1943 came a peak in home canning with more than 4 billion cans and jars processed. And in 1945 slid in home refrigeration and the decline of our home canning, which was becoming a regular way of life. So the main methods of canning are water bath canning. And I think these steps right here, they're important to know, so you know what you should be water bath canning and what you should be pressure canning. So water bath canning is just what it says. It uses boiling water to process high acid foods with a pH of 4.6 or lower. Pressure canning uses steam, pressure, and high heat to process low acid foods with a pH greater than 4.6. And there's the pH scale. It goes from 1 to 14. So why should we give a care about altitude? All right? Air pressure goes down at higher altitudes, which changes the boiling point of water when using the water bath method. The processing time will increase. If you're, and we'll look at an altitude chart right after this. And when you're pressure canning, you're using that method, the temperature must increase. Most recipes are based on an elevation of 1,000 feet or under. And I believe we wrote, I think Hudson is 363 or something. So anyways, so if you are now, I live in Athol, ours is, I think, 400 and something feet. Like I said, Hudson is in the 300s, I believe. Unless you're really climbing up into a mountain, most of us in this state, most of us are below 1,000 feet. And most recipes are based on just that, something 1,000 feet or lower. But here's a chart. If you go to, it's 1,000 to 3,000 feet, and I think it's Mount Greylock, that's 3,000 something feet. So that's the highest point in Massachusetts. There aren't many people that are in higher elevations here. But I mean, it goes all the way up to 10,000 feet. I don't know who's canning way up there, but I imagine somebody is. So as you go, your weighted gauge will change on your pressure canner, and your dial, I'll explain that after, but there's a dial on top of your pressure canner as well that will be set at a higher altitude. Your water bath canner will add minutes in increments of 5. So anything over 3,000 feet will add an extra 5 minutes, and so on. You can see the chart. From 3,000 to 6,000, it'll add 10 minutes. So, and that's general information. It's great that we have the internet now. You can find this stuff. But you always want to pay attention to your particular canner's manual as well, because there may be different instructions for each one. Not that different though. So you can Google your altitude, not your attitude. You can Google your altitude, like everything else. And obviously your altitude doesn't change unless you move or you put your house on some pretty high stilts. You could probably, but Hudson, Mass is 336 feet in altitude. So why do we care about our acidity level in food? It makes a big difference because it's going to be the difference between water bath canning, like we said, or pressure canning. So our food acidity level directly affects the natural growth of mold, yeast, bacteria, and enzymes. Mold is a fungi that can be visible, but it can also be non-visible. Some can produce mycotoxins that are toxic to us, that will make us sick, in some cases be fatal. Yeasts are a fungi as well that can cause fermentation, and both can make food unsafe to consume. Enzymes are proteins that also promote spoilage, and foods that are considered low pH are naturally safer from bacteria. So something that has a high acid, like a tomato or fruit, okay, is something that will not have things living in it as much, okay? They will get killed off easier. But sometimes when you're water bathing tomatoes and certain things, you got to add lemon juice to them to bring up the acidity, or citric acid. But we'll talk a little bit more about that after. So foods that are considered low pH are naturally safer from bacteria, but if left unprocessed, they will multiply. They're easily destroyed when brought up to a temperature between 140 and 190. But a water bath canner goes up to 212 degrees, and that's the boiling point of water. So, I mean, you're well killing off things that would be in tomatoes and fruits and whatnot. So again, yeah, your water bath canner reaches 212, the point of boiling, and when left at these temperatures for a set amount of time, it makes a safe and effective way to preserve high acid foods, or pH of 4.6 or lower. And if you've never canned before, this can sound complicated, but it's not. It becomes second nature. After a while, once you learn these general rules and once you learn your elevation, you don't have to learn your elevation anymore. You don't have to worry about those things. You're going to find out that as you go, everything just ends up becoming really second nature. It's not hard. This is not rocket science. We don't need to be afraid of home canning. If you follow some certain rules, you should be safe. If you store your food correctly, you should be safe. Doesn't mean you shouldn't be careful though. It says, so they are inactivated starting at 140 degrees, easily being eradicated by the water bath method. So that we're still talking about enzymes there. So there are certain bacterias, some of which do not only survive, but they actually thrive in conditions that will easily destroy yeast and mold. They can even survive without oxygen when accompanied by moisture. And it sounds like they love the inside of a jar of food, wouldn't they? That would be the ideal place for them to grow, inside of a sealed jar. So exactly, that's why the acid food above a pH of 4.6 needs to be processed in a high pressure canner. This canner can bring the food up to 240 degrees using less water with steam, and killing the possibility of what we know as the dreaded botulism, the possibility of botulism, I should say. It's able to kill staph, which makes pressure canning the safest method for low acid foods. Now, canning can be very divisive. You go online and you can get some pretty angry ladies on there. If you're not, no, seriously, it's like being at Macy's in the old days, wrestling over, you know, undergarments and stuff. But people get really serious. They get angry about the rules of canning. There are generally two camps, and then there's a little bit of gray in between, okay? You got the camp that is USDA, You do everything by the rules, you have to do everything spot on by the USDA, and then there's what's called the rebel canner. Anything that's against those exact rules. I fall somewhere in the middle of the spectrum, okay? I'm going to put forth all the safe methods of canning, and I'm going to stick to those things. I think that's the place that you should start. I think it's the smart place to start. You don't want to just start hara-kiri canning. You need to get used to, hara-kiri canning. You need to get used to what you're doing first, and it's smart to start in a safe area. And it's your kitchen, they're your rules, but, you know, we got to use our heads when we're saving food. So water bath is, again, I'm saying high acid foods. I remember always messing these up, and finally I got it down. High acid foods below 4.6. And these are just some examples that you can water bath. Pickles, sauces, condiments, chutneys and relish, salsas, jams, jellies, fruit butters, tomatoes, sauerkraut. You should always stick with tested recipes, and I know maybe some of us have a grandmother or a mom that used to do this certain recipe that you're not going to find in the USDA, and, you know, like I said, your kitchen, your rules. But I'm going to suggest sticking with tested recipes, and there's a million of them out there for probably anything you wanted. You talked about French onion soup, right? I already know, because it's one of the things that I want to do. If I'm going to do a soup next, it's going to be French onion. We got onions this big this year. I'm very excited. So people also jar juice and even water. Yes, people jar water. And you've seen lately that we've had some food chain issues. You know, it's something to think about. Water is really an important source. It's the most important thing to keep us alive. You can't go without water for very long. But anyways, so there's most fruits: berries, cherries, cranberries, peaches, pears, plums, and there's a lot more. And like I had mentioned before, some of these high acid foods may call for added lemon juice or citric acid, and citric acid comes in a powder form. And they recommend, and I have, when I first started to learn to can, I actually was probably about 12 years ago, and I learned in that kitchen in there. I didn't have a grandmother that canned or a mom that canned, but I naturally wanted to save what was coming out of my garden, and I latched on to a more, I will call her a more experienced church member. She was a more mature church member, and she took me in there and taught me how to can tomatoes and peaches, and I had a great time, and it's been invaluable to me. So they recommend that you stick with the bottled lemon juice. You can use, and we squeezed our own lemons that day, I believe, but this is going to be a more regulated form of acid, and it will be safer, just in general. And I use the real lemon. Okay. So foods, more foods that are safe to can, to pressure can. So the low acid foods above a 4.6 on the pH scale. So this is more alkaline stuff. And this is where your vegetables fall in, your carrots, your corn, asparagus, peas, beans, beets, potatoes, which I'm going to be doing pretty soon, winter squash, pumpkin, your soups, and again, you want to, and I'll keep referring to this. You're going to hear me say, check your recipe, because your recipe has your suggested processing time. You're going to hear the word processing a lot. It's just the amount of time that's used for a certain recipe to be processed. Then you can use that chart to find out whether or not you have to add more time, or that you can use what they're suggesting in the recipe. It should include everything. So greens, you can even do greens, which I have not done those yet. Meats and seafood. I'm going to tell you right now, I haven't done any of that because I'm a vegetarian, and I have been ever since I learned how to can. So I'm all about canning veggies and things like that. So, but they can be very successfully canned. Meat, seafoods, various tested recipes, broths, and stocks is what you will do in your pressure canner. So foods that are not safe to can. And I think it was probably 11 years ago, before I was really getting into the internet, that I canned a soup that was on the not safe list. And thankfully, my husband didn't eat it because it just didn't look right to me. But for some reason, we didn't throw the can away. And he kept saying, I'm gonna eat that zucchini soup. And I said, no, you're not. I don't know why I just didn't take it and toss it out. But I did, I made it. And I could tell that something was not right with it. So it says the following are not safe to can due to things like low moisture content, starch, and poor heat penetration. This is a recipe for disaster and bacterial growth. One is oil. Oil has a tendency to not let the heat penetrate, and the idea is to let the heat penetrate to the center of the jar, so it kills the possibility of all these things, these mold, the bacteria, the yeast, the enzymes. Oil can actually protect bad bacteria. So high fat content food, which would fall under that category, obviously. Low moisture and poor heat penetration, again. Pasta and rice. Starch also has a way of preventing heat from getting to the center of the jar and making things safe. Breads and cakes, although I don't know how you do that anyways. You want to stick bread inside of a jar and dip it in boiling water or steam? I don't know how that would work. I imagine somebody's trying to do it out there, or maybe they even do it successfully. That's the other thing is, I talked about rebel canning. There are generations of Amish women that don't pressure can at all and have never heard of the USDA. And now if you told those I'm not going to call them crazy ladies, but you tell those other ladies that are very USDA, you know, they'd have a heart attack if they heard that. But Amish women in a lot of circles just water bath can everything. They do it for longer periods of time though. But like I said, a very divisive subject, and you should really stay safe. I don't recommend it. Dairy products, again, high fat with the ability to protect harmful bacterial spores. Okay, so we're going to get into the tools and supplies. So you need jars. Obviously you need jars. You need jars that are free of defects. You want to look for cracks and chips, okay? Bands and, I'm going to take that back. Bands and rings, which are these guys right here. You can use these over and over again. After a little while from rubbing against the glass and washing them, they have a tendency to get rusty. You can replace them then, you know. I mean, I have some rusty lids that I might use for dry goods. I have a tendency to hold on to them. So clean towels and paper towels or paper towels. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Ooh. So when you're canning, it can be a really messy thing. Things get pretty crazy really quickly if you're not organized. I really recommend staying organized and having a lot of towels on hand. I have a tendency to like to use a nice big stack of white clean towels, and I say that because when you're wiping a jelly jar, you see the color on the white towel. You can move it to another place and you can see whether or not you still have something on the rim, and that is important when you're canning. You want the rim of the jar to be clear of anything. So you're going to have a jar lifter, and that is this guy that you put around the jar, and you're able to lift it when the jar is hot. Okay, they have another version. Oh, watch me, it'll hit the floor and break, right? They have another one. I haven't used this one much, But if you've put your hot jars down on the counter and for some reason, maybe they're not in the ideal spot and you didn't plan very well, you know, you can use this from the side, because you certainly can't use this when you're trying to take this out of a really tall pot. It doesn't make much sense to me. That's why this is sat. I haven't really used it. I always use this guy right here. You need a rack, okay? And that is this guy right here, or something similar to that, on the bottom of the pan. Sometimes people, and I've done this before, take a bunch of rings and put them on the bottom of the pan to protect the glass from hitting the heat element. You don't want that because that can cause breakage. And I've even heard that some people have created a vacuum, not been able to get their jar off the bottom of the pot. I haven't had that problem. I've never even had a jar break, actually. So you need a jar funnel, which that's pretty self-explanatory. They have them in plastic. They have them in stainless steel. I like everything stainless. I have a tendency to like stainless steel when it comes to utensils. I'm not a big fan of plastic, but I use it too. So you got your rack, you got a bubble remover. You can use pretty much anything that isn't metal for a bubble remover. I've used chopsticks. Like I have a plastic chopstick. They have an actual tool for this. You can use a rubber spatula, anything to remove bubbles from the jar. And I think I lost my headspace tool, but okay. So, and that's the other thing, a headspace tool. It's around here somewhere. I have a headspace tool. But anyways, it's a flat object, and it looks like it has a little set of stairs at the bottom of it. And what it does is it measures where the product should come from the top of the jar. And it's usually between a 1/4 inch and an inch headspace and it'll call on the recipe for what the headspace should be.